Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for July 2021. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs. By sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. This month's topic, as determined by the poll, is DM bans. Certain rules, classes, or spells may drive us crazy, and so crazy we don't want them in our games, or perhaps our homebrew worlds limit what features we can use and allow. How and when do we lay down the law for our table? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Mr. Farty McButterpants.
Hello.
And Stan.
Greetings.
Dan, since you are the newbie to Discord and the server, I'm going to let you start off. You are chosen first to let me know, do you have any bans that you use game to game? And then do you have any specific things that you have discovered that you need to ban?
Definitely from, I run a homebrew version of Forgotten Realms. So I was a DM back in first and second edition, and so to me that's the Forgotten Realms I know and love and have memorized. So there's a lot of stuff like spell plague, whatnot, that does not exist in my world because fourth edition.
So it's a timeline thing.
It's partly a timeline, but then there's also some character classes. I tend to run with a lot of my players have strong religious feelings. So there are certain character classes and races like tieflings, Aasimar, warlocks are dropped out of my world.
Wait, what about clerics?
I would say the biggest murder hobo I had in my most recent game was a cleric.
Okay.
Nothing is scarier than spiritual weapons, spirit guardians, and she was an archer.
That's a good combo.
You put that together, and we went into an enemy village once, and I thought she was going to shred the whole place. She restrained herself. But, so those are some of the general ground things that
that's pretty big. Then you ban whole classes.
Yeah, and also it's kind of like for a little bit of a realism thing. There's certain monster races and stuff I tend to limit to Xanathars and Player's Handbook.
Okay.
Kind of limit to those things a little bit.
Right, because was it Volos that added a lot of like the bugbears and Kinkus and stuff to play as? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like Kinkos and Tabaxi, they don't fit into my old version of the Forgotten Realms.
Okay. What about? Sorry, go ahead.
A Goliath is fine. Half work, fine. Some of those are, to me, those are kind of a little more reasonable. Some of the more fantastical stuff I kind of scale down. So you can kind of say it might be a little bit lower magic than current 5th edition, as written.
Okay. So they've added entire new classes, obviously, since 1st and 2nd. So do you ban like Barbarian and Sorcerer? I think you already said Warlock. What about Monk?
Barbarian, Sorcerer, Monk, those are fine. I don't do Gunpowder. So Artificers, probably not.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay, that's a pretty big one for a lot of bans. Farty, let's jump to you. What about your just blanket bans? It doesn't have to necessarily be classes. You can include like spells or multi-classing or any kind of exploits or something like
that. I kind of come from a totally different area than Stan. Because I was still fairly new when I was running my last couple of campaigns. I kept it more to PHB, Player's Handbook, just because I didn't know what was out there and I didn't want things blowing up on me. So that's part of the reason why I restricted it, just because I didn't, want to have all of a sudden this crazy build that I wasn't prepared for.
Honestly, that is great advice for any new DMs. Even though it's easy to get excited and want to like play with all of the toys in the toy box, the easiest thing to do is start with the starter set, which is the player's handbook, because there's plenty of content in there. You can easily run a full game, a full party, and have a ton of options and things. But for that exact reason, like, it does get a little crazy as you start putting in all those, I guess, expansions in a way. Well, I'm glad we have some with a more recent point of view, so that's a good dichotomy, because I'm kind of closer to you, where I really didn't start. I definitely didn't start DMing until 5th edition, so I'm very much new to the DM game. Ban wise, so when I started, 5th edition was new enough where it was just the player's handbook. So that was easy. Obviously, we just started with the player's handbook. And it's been kind of nice because as we've been playing, they've been adding all the new content. So it's been a really nice gradual, rollout to start learning all the new rules and races and classes and spells and all that. So that's actually come at a pretty good pace for us. In terms of bans, though, from the very beginning, I kind of had a soft ban on any other content, like anything from the DM's Guild, ironically, because I do a bunch of reviews on there, but we just wanted to keep stuff official. Now, I never used the rule of the Adventurers League, which is to say you can only use content from the player's handbook plus one other book, which always felt weird, and I think they just recently dropped that because there's so many books now. They realized that was probably too restrictive.
Well, Tosh just took the lid off of everything.
Yeah. But we still kind of have that in play, and the only reason I haven't really rescinded that, it's not really for a balance reason so much, but there's, like I said, they've just been rolling out content at such a steady pace, and it takes us generally a good chunk of time to play through a campaign and play through characters, that we really haven't had to look beyond the official content yet. If somebody was really excited about something and brought it to table, I would really look at it and maybe make a choice there. So it'd probably be more of a case-by-case basis. I don't know if I would just completely shut it down. So it's weird. It's not really like a hard, like I have a thing against, extra content. And goodness knows I've reviewed so many freaking subclass content on the DM's Guild where I have a pretty good handle on what, on paper looks balanced and what looks grossly imbalanced. And I've seen them all. But I don't think I would necessarily have a problem with it. What about you all for, Stan, we'll go with you, for third-party content? Somebody brings something that says, hey, I found this on the DM's Guild, or I found this on, Unearthed Arcana or something, and I want to play this character or use this spell or something.
So spells and stuff, I normally don't have a problem with that. I allow my characters to flavor certain things. I had a gnome wizard that ran a lot of stuff that was lightning based. So I'm perfectly fine with reflavoring. If she came to me and said, hey, Fireball's cool, can I do a lightning version of that? Sure, I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. On the flip side of that, I'm the one that torment my players with third-party content. I am a Nord Games fan. Like their Dreaded Curse book, that a lot of people get tired, like, oh, a white's only like a CR2 creature or something. Yeah, run Dreaded Curse where you're pulling down CR10 whites. They've got different flavors of them, and it makes the character go, oh, it's a white. It did what?
Yeah, I feel like that's different for DM, because I feel like it's almost expected for DMs to bring that new content to the table, right? I mean,
my players are still terrified at level 8 of orcs.
Nice.
Because of some of the stuff I've pulled from. They've got a horde book of different, different advanced goblins and ogres, and different of your low level monsters, and that's a heck of a lot of fun to throw at them. But third party content doesn't really freak me out too much, because, like I said, I've been doing this for all my players are half my age.
So you would allow a player,
I can still terrorize them with orcs.
You would allow a player to bring like some custom class, for example, because you mentioned the fact that you're limited based on your world, the kind of like classes and maybe subclasses that are available.
If
If it
they come
fit,
to me with a good story reason of how does this fit in the world, and we could work together on it, that's fine. One of my players when we first started my girls game said she wanted to do the halfling female version of Indiana Jones,
okay.
and we were playing Horde of the Dragon Queen, and they have a draconologist. And so she wrote me like this 5-page backstory, and it was absolutely glorious. And I said, okay, well, how about if we do this draconologist, some of these skills, tweak things a little bit, and kind of customize it a little bit? And she goes, this is awesome. And she played it for 4 years. Loved it.
Wow. Was that a complete custom class then, or did you take a class and then change it?
We took the draconologist background, added it to a classic troubleshooter thief, and just tweaked, just a few minor things that some of those things I don't care about. It's like someone gets, you swap this skill out for this skill. I don't care.
Okay.
That's not going to unbalance a game to me.
Yeah. Farty, do you have any kind of ban on any unofficial content that players bring to the table?
I haven't had anybody bring anything like that. If they do bring something, that I'm not aware of, first thing I'll say is I'll check it out, and then the next day I'm on YouTube searching videos trying to find, okay, if it says broken anywhere, I want to watch that video. Because that to me is where it's like, okay, they're going to explain what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm okay. The number one challenge I have is as long as it doesn't make my work too hard. Because if you bring in a character that when we get up to level 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and all of a sudden this character's laying down huge damage, and I now have to make huge adjustments to the game to make that work. It's stressful, right? Because you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, what the heck? How do I challenge this guy but not kill the rest of the team?
Yeah, a lot of the stress comes from because at one point it's cool to make your players feel empowered. That's obviously a big part of it. But the problem becomes if one person is always the amazing star in those scenarios, which you could argue like, okay, well maybe they're not as good in out of combat situations, so during social encounters or during exploration. But I think we can all admit that combat is obviously a huge part of D&D, and that's what a lot of people play it for. And having one person shine to such a degree, it's not necessarily bad for. Yes, we have to compensate for different reasons for that, but also just you feel bad for their players, when they're like, oh, I didn't, I did one thing and did 6 damage, and the person's like, I did 30 damage in my turn. That can be a little bit disappointing for them for sure. What about? So we don't have any kind of soft rule, even though we don't have any necessarily a lot of experience with somebody literally bringing something to the table. The one thing that we've had in the past, which was not in my games but was in Chris's games during Storm King's Thunder, and in War for the Lost Plane as well, when I did this, is he allowed first Raymond and then me to use the Unearthed Arcana Ranger. Because the consensus for a long time was that the base Ranger is underpowered because a lot of its abilities interact with elements of the game that a lot of DMs and tables don't use at all, which is, exploration and tracking things down and worrying about terrain and all that. Like, and us included, we tend to handwave a lot of that or simplify it into a single check that does something. And the Unearthed Arcana Ranger fixes a lot of that by bringing back its abilities more into actual usable combat stuff that would come up a lot more often. And then finally that has come around now where I think Tasha's kind of finally, quote unquote, fixes the Ranger in a lot of ways. But we played Storm King's Thunder before Tasha's came out, years before, and Raymond came in using that Unearthed Arcana. So in that case, technically that's a weird gray area where it is a wizard's produced element, but it just hasn't been published yet. So it's still like kind of in the beta testing phase. Basically, it's an early access.
It's playtest.
Yeah, basically. But it is for sure. And some of it will appear in published material later, and some of it won't. So that's the only real experience we've had with stuff like that. And then I believe also used that Unearthed Arcana Ranger because we started that the War for the Lost Plane campaign, and then like months later, freaking Tasha's came out, and I would have been like, oh well, this would have been the way to go. But that's neither here nor there. But that was the only real experience we had with using any kind of non-official source. Now, the other question is, has there been a case where a player has used something that you've normally obviously allowed because they've been doing it, and you realize that they've come across an exploit, maybe not necessarily an exploit, but some combination of spells or abilities or classes or multi-classes that you decided either then and there or maybe for future games and campaigns that you were like, I'm not going to allow this anymore. This is too much. Artie, what do you think?
Yeah, it's like there's been obviously surprises as I've been playing. So I know we had one warlock who got a glaive and was dealing huge amounts of damage. A lot more than anybody else. So at that point it's like, okay, well, he's already got it. He's using it quite well. What do I do? Like, do I
As a
pull it away
hexblade, or what kind of subclass?
Yeah, hexblade. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so then you try to figure out, okay, well, how do I challenge this guy? How do I keep it interesting, but not kill the other guys that aren't delivering that damage?
So in that case, did you in the future ever decide to ban that, or you just decided I'm just going to work around this and try to elevate?
No, I just worked around it, and I think in the future it would just be knowing that that's out there.
Yeah.
And you kind of, in the end, if I felt that anybody was doing something where it was like, okay, you know what, this is killing me, this is too tough, I just have a side conversation and say, look, you're killing me here. I can't keep. I'm trying. I'm trying to make this balance. It's not working.
Yeah.
Is there something you can do on your end to kind of tone it down a little bit? And usually people are pretty good.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't think about just going to the player and saying, "Look, man, you're it's just too much." Because the weird thing, if it was a video game, there'd be patch notes, right? They'd be like, "Oh, well, the warlock is dealing too much damage, so we patched that, and now we nerf their damage a little bit, or we buff somebody else." And you can't really do that necessarily as a DM, without literally picking on the player. So that's not a bad solution. Is just to talk to them about it, and be like, "Hey, how can we, make sure other folks have a chance to shine?" And maybe the person makes that part of maybe they either understand that and say, okay, I'll just try and, not pull all my shit all the time. Or they can work that into their role playing and be like, oh, well, I'm going to show off this round and do this thing, even though it's not the most efficient thing to do. I would definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not every single round. Every time you meet anything, it's like, okay, I do this, that, and yeah. It's okay, I'm going to bring it out when we really need it.
Yeah.
Or when I really want to shine. But
And
yeah, I hate nerfing stuff. I feel so bad when I go to we go to someone and say you can't use that anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of D&D, a lot of that is about efficiency, and certainly that attracts a lot of that kind of person is somebody who is looking and saying, looking at all these abilities and classes and spells and saying, how can I turn myself into the most efficient killing machine? And there's a lot of things you can do to overtune that, and I think they've become pretty well known, and Warlock is usually pretty problematic because of that, and hell, I was guilty of that in Storm King's Thunder. I played a Warlock Paladin, which a lot of people say is a bullshit class combo, for the very reason that you can take those Divine Smites that are so powerful as a Paladin, and you can just burn through spell slots, and all of a sudden you've got spell slots that recharge on a short rest, and the combination is delicious. But thankfully it never really felt that crazy, although I will say this is before the Hexblade existed. So it's maybe, banning certain multi-class combinations could be the answer, and yet I like the fact that 5th edition doesn't do that. That's one of the things that the older editions, and Stan, maybe you can chime in on this, older editions had very strict rules on multi-classing and even what races could or could not multi-class, and thus the combinations were not as crazy. And then in 3rd edition, a lot of it was alignment based. So it was, if you were barbarian, you had to be chaotic. If you were a paladin, you had to be lawful. If you were a bard, I think you had to be chaotic. Or no, I think if you were a paladin, you had to be lawful good specifically. Druids had to be specifically neutral along the line. Yeah. So the only way to do crazy multi-classes was to do this convoluted alignment change system as you leveled up, and it was kind of nuts. But Stan, what are
assassins by as written were evil?
Wow, yeah. So it would be pretty tricky to do. So back in the day, I probably wouldn't be able to pull off my paladin warlock combo very easily, and yet now I can take advantage of a very powerful class combo. Stan, have you had any combinations or things that people brought that you thought, oh, this is really strong, and have you then had to ban that?
I've never nerfed anything. I actually kind of go the opposite way. One of the statements my players hear very frequently is actions have consequences. My job is to impose those consequences. And anything you can do, I can do. So
Okay.
if you introduce something at the table, I can do that as the bad guys now.
Okay. So you could have a villainous paladin warlock combo that has all those abilities.
And I've been blessed with players that are very story and character focused. So they're not looking at the mechanics of trying to min-max and things like that. I've only had 2 characters on both the... I was running 3 games for a while. Wow. All 3 of my games, I've only had 2 characters multi-class. Got raised through a very powerful holy artifact and became a divine soul sorcerer, multi-class. And then the paladin, due to his being lawful stupid, got the party's cleric killed.
Oh no!
And out of grief, he took up the mantle of a straight cleric because he got his friend killed. He literally got his friend killed.
Wow.
Someone asked, it was a trap. Someone was saying, "Hey, we're hurt. We need a healer. Do you have a healer in the party?" He grabbed the cleric and ran forward, and they just beat the crap out of them and killed him.
Oh my god.
And so those are the 2 multi-classes. But kind of going back to any other hard bans, I don't do counterspell. Because I want my players to feel like they're heroes, and with the level of evil and stuff that they're encountering, I'd counterspell a Revivify. And I don't want to do that.
Oh no. So you banned counterspell for yourself mostly. But
if anything they can do, I can do. And it's like, I don't want to do this to you because I would.
Man.
So, and they all look at me and go, yeah, we're good with that.
But so that means they have to take, because you can counterspell a counterspell if I remember correctly, as long as people have reactions.
As long as you have multiple casters, arcane casters, and both parties are very light on those.
That's interesting. Counterspell is one of those spells that can just shut things down in a not fun way for both sides. I mean, for multiple reasons. Like it's an incredibly useful spell because the ability to just turn off spells is very nice. Although eventually, with higher spells, you have to roll the dice to see if you can actually shut it down. My last character had all kinds of trouble trying to counterspell in that tier 4 campaign. Just not happening very often. But I could definitely see that being a useful ban.
It's just not fun.
Yeah, that I kind of agree with that. The fact that you can just turn off enemy spells, because it's a big part of it, and the fact that enemies can do that to players would be really shitty if they just start casting a spell. I'm going to cast my big spell, and the DM's like, no, you're not. It's counterspell. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point. What about Dispel Magic? Do you allow that one?
I've never had a player actually use it in a game.
Hmm. 'Cause I
I
think,
wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't have a problem with that,
yeah.
but I've literally never had a player use it.
So I think that one is similar, but it's not a reaction. It's you have to spend your turn,
Mm-hmm.
you know, turning off whatever effect, which could be a trap effect or could be a debuff or something or buff.
Yeah, they're very efficient mage killers. They use silence. They have the cleric dropping a silence spell,
Hmm.
and then they turn the divine soul sorcerer eldritch knight loose on them. Because here's a good one: the kind of using critical roles, vestiges of divergence. These really scalable, ultimately high-powered legendary magic items,
Ah, yes. Very cool ideas.
and she's wielding Hazuran from. They killed the leader of the Black Dragons in Horde of the Dragon Queen, and she's now using Hazuran.
Wow.
And she did 110 points of damage on a white dragon in one round. She hit all 4 times.
My goodness.
And it's like, as a DM, okay, congratulations, you beheaded a dragon. There's nothing I can do with that.
Incredible. Farty, do you have any spell bans? Like counterspell?
No, I don't, but it's actually a good point. I think something like that where it takes away agency. I mean, you've got somebody that wants to do this really cool thing, and you just take it out of their hands. I think that's a tough one to swallow. I think dispel magic's probably a little bit different because you just something's already in place and you're dispelling it. But
Yeah.
I've
You
never
brought
thought.
up a great point of player agency. I don't use dominate person either.
Hmm.
Oh,
As from one of my bad guys, I know I know my players very well, and I know that they would be crushed if you take their agency away, and I'm making them do things to their friends.
Now,
That's not going to flat.
do you
That's not going to flatten my table.
do you actually ban it, or do you just self-restrict yourself from using that spell?
I self restrict it, and they've never used it.
Okay.
It's not something the way they play. That isn't the way they play the game.
What about lighter ones like command or suggestion?
That's how I learned it. I used
Hmm.
command on a player at the table when they were level 1, and in Horde of the Dragon Queen, one of the enemy casters has got it, and I used it, and basically just kind of taunting a little bit and said kneel.
Hmm.
And the reaction I got from the table, not doing that again.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I can see where that could definitely create some problems. Neil seems so innocuous though too, but
Mm-hmm.
my goodness.
They were not happy.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a whole spell line about. I'm not off the top of my head. I'm thinking command and suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Geas maybe would be another one where you're instructed to do
Mm-hmm.
something and you take damage if you don't do it or something.
Yep. The whole enchanter concept.
Yeah, basically. I
It's
mean,
a
you
whole
could
school of magic.
you
Yeah.
could you could still do stuff like hypnotic pattern probably because that's just
Mm-hmm.
shutting
It's a
things.
stunning. Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, which is kind of also shitty to do to players in a way, but I mean that's
See mind flayers.
right. Yeah. That is a good point though. I could see why dominate person and suggestion either blanket ban or as you could always just choose as a DM. You're choosing what you're using, and you could just be like, I'm not going to use people that are specifically enchantment based evil wizards. Instead, we'll just throw
It kind of
fireballs.
goes to your session 0
Yeah.
of what are your players' hard stops, and at that particular table, consent really mattered.
And really, I mean, in general, that probably is going to be your number one is don't take that away. I mean, in in crafting this morning, slight spoilers for our Icewind Dale campaign, but I talked about possibly kidnapping one of the player characters as being a possible avenue to the story that I had been given by the players the last session. And obviously, the first thing I would do is going to talk to that player and seeing how they would feel about this kind of thing. For that very reason, like you don't want to just drop this on your players. It's such a shitty thing to do as a DM, and I feel like most DMs know that, but it still bears repeating for folks that even if you think the story's gonna be really cool and you think that player's gonna be cool with it, go ahead and let that player in on your plans if that is in fact your plan. And it may be that they're like, oh yeah, it's gonna be really cool, or it may be that like okay, I think it's cool, but what are your plans? Like, you know, am I going to sit out that whole session, or am I going to get to play like as a separate entity or as an NPC? Like, you know, they might have questions about it, or they may say, no, that really, I don't see my character doing that. I don't see that being a fun thing to do. Then make adjustments from there. But yeah, for sure, always with consent. So I could definitely see why using Dominate Person. I think Suggestion is still a fun spell if you make it interesting, but I also know my players and we would all be comfortable with that kind of thing. I don't know if I've ever... God, we played a whole freaking campaign with a bunch of UNT, and I don't know if I ever got a goddamn Suggestion spell off. Is it Suggestion that they have? I think it's Suggestion. Where, like, the basic UNT can do it, the Purebloods. And I can't remember if I ever actually...
I've tried Suggestion, it's the same. It never flies.
It never works. Like, they always make...
Damn it.
They just always make the save, and I always think it'd be a pretty fun thing is you could just... I don't think you can tell them to hurt themselves, but you can always just come up with funny things, like drop your weapons and run, or, you know, something. That would really, like, help, like, you know, add a new element, but it they always made the save.
There was in the temple, before they were going up to the Naga, the fight down below, I think you had one of them where you kind of stunned somebody, like you put them to sleep or something for a round.
Okay.
That might be the only time you got that off.
So memorable because it only happened once.
Well, they were flying like crazy because they were so outnumbered.
Yeah. I don't think I have any... I mean, Counterspell is a good idea. That'd be really interesting to introduce to eliminate that one. It hasn't... I'm trying to think if it came up very much in the recent campaign. I mean, I did a lot in our high level campaign for sure. Especially when you're high level, man, you can just burn through those spell slots. It's like, hell yeah, I might as well use those on Counterspell. Like, high level enemy spells are awful. Like, they're all going to be awful, so I'm just going to Counterspell all the time. Now, we did introduce additional Counterspell rules where you had to, like, roll something to identify the spell. That made it a little bit more interesting, but then it also kind of slowed, you know, the action down a bit. So I'm not opposed to actually banning that. You may have given me an idea for that one.
Well, it allows you to have high-level casters that matter.
Yeah, for sure. Would you ever ban anything in the middle of a campaign, and not necessarily at the session 0? Like, something has come to your attention that needs to be given a hard ban. Like, obviously you can still talk to your players about it and have that discussion, but would that come up, or would you only be able to really do that at the session 0?
If it's a grievous enough thing, I think I could.
Yeah, I think if you have that conversation with them, and just say, look, this is not working. This is too much trouble. Most people are pretty good, either individually or as a group. You can just even hash it out on Discord.
Yeah. I know I've been through some pain in the ass spells, like Fog Cloud is infamously a spell that for some reason my dumb ass can never just wrap my head around the mechanics of Fog Cloud. And I think that's partly because the actual, like, stealth and perception rules of D&D 5th edition are still kind of loosey-goosey. And the fact that advantage and disadvantage can cancel each other out, which makes the Fog Cloud kind of just a weird thing to introduce. And it basically, any spell that requires a lot of ruling by the DM can cause a lot of headaches. So I see the usefulness of that one, but I've had to fucking come up with so many stupid rules for Fog Cloud to make it work in my brain that I am, like, always on the edge of just outright banning that stupid spell. And it's not even, I don't know, it's not even that complicated, but for some reason I just can't get that one to work correctly. And the other one is the hut, Leoman's Tiny Hut, which gives players an instant safe long rest zone for a third level spell slot. That seems... I'll say this, it worked out fine in Tomb of Annihilation, because at the point they got it, they were 5th level, and at that point I'm like, alright, we're pretty much bringing the Hex Crawl to a close. So, yes, you're just going to be able to do this to basically get through the jungle and not have to worry about a lot of night encounters anymore. But it still can be a bit of a headache, because that can be a big part of your campaign planning, is if I want to ambush the players at night or do any, nighttime encounters or anything, and suddenly they've got this literal magic bubble they can cast, And I think they can cast it as like a ritual, so it doesn't even cast a spell slot.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's a 10-minute casting time regardless.
right, yeah. So you're really not supposed to use it like in combat, obviously, but
Right.
I don't know. It seems really
I
easy.
saw a DM. I saw a DM in another YouTube game. He fixed that, and I've not had the problem in my games. But the way he fixed it, I thought was brilliant. And it's like, if I ever run into this, this is how I'm solving it. They did a tiny hut in the middle of a dungeon, and one of the patrolling random encounters found them, and they stacked the hallway. And so when the hut came down, they had hell to pay.
Yeah.
And because it was a sponsored game, it was a TPK, and they respawned. They were playing like Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and they did a Hallister hand wave, and they reappeared in another section of the dungeon because it was a sponsored game.
Okay.
But yeah, it turned into a TPK, and they learned you probably don't want to do that here.
I mean, but the pain in the ass there is you just made that much more work for the DM. Like, the work you just said is like, oh, we can long rest anywhere, and now the DM has to then do all the work to say, okay, well, I got to figure out if you're found at any point, and then what the enemy does, and how they react, and put all this together. So it still makes a lot more work to be able to respond to that. Yes, that is something you can do, which is to say, okay, well, you quote-unquote triggered a random encounter, but now that encounter can't get to you, but the enemy is maybe intelligent enough to, just wait out and create this huge trap of enemies. But I don't necessarily find that the most satisfying solution, and if it led to a TPK because of a random encounter, frankly, I'm not sure that is a successful solution either. So,
well, they were in the middle of a temple complex that was not ruins; it was a live complex.
So obviously the players didn't play that smart. Yeah.
No, that was an earned TPK.
Yeah, that's true. At least try to find a side closet or something. Come on. Yeah, that one. I'm not in the realm of banning that yet, but that one has caused me to kind of sit up and go, okay, so this is something that players can do at 5th level, is create a zone of essentially impenetrable long rest safety, which, again, spoilers for Tomb of Annihilation campaign, I did find a way past that, which is to use not polymorphed, UNT just have the ability to transform into snakes. So I had UNT already as snakes, just, hidden basically in that same zone before they cast it. And then once they cast it, the UNT then transformed out of their snake form and became whatever they were, Malisons. And thus they were already inside the dome when they attacked. So that's a free one. You can all use that one. But I could only do that once because you don't want to fuck with the players too much, because that's such a bullshit thing to do, because now obviously they're just going to search for snakes every time they bed down, even if they're in the jungle. So I don't think it...
Go ahead. One thing with that spell is, while it's opaque, it says it's opaque, so you can't see in.
It's like tinted windows. It's like you can see, like the inside can see out, but I don't think the out's supposed to see in.
Can you hear? Can you smell? I mean, if you're an animal and all of a sudden there's this opaque bubble in the middle of the forest.
Yeah.
I had this whole thing where the wolf comes up and starts sniffing around the thing, and I'm sniffing into the microphone, making the noise. Then there's more coming. And these guys are sitting in, they can see out, so they're sitting in there watching all these.
It's like Jurassic Park style at that point. Like, you just, you're inside the bubble and there's the big things coming.
Time starts ticking down. Oh, it's 7 hours, 55 minutes.
There's 14 wolves on top of the dome. And
right, yeah. Away. That'd be a funny way to do an encounter, actually. But the weird thing is, this stupid spell goes even further than that, because it allows people inside to shoot out of the dome. It's such bullshit. Like, what kind of magical force field is this that not only protects everybody, but you can still attack people from inside the dome? Because I was thinking, okay, what a cool thing that would be to have, like, a gorilla, whatever the forearm things are, like, draped over the top of it, like sleeping on it or something, and maybe like 3 or 4 of them, and the players like wake up to that and like, oh shit, how do we get past this? But then you read that spell and it's like they can just fucking shoot out of it without any because nobody outside can get in. that spell could just do too much. It's so crazy. I'm not banning it, but it's such a crazy damn spell. I don't think anybody has taken it, although in our current campaign, although I think bards, well, I know bards can take it. That's how we did it in Tomb. Well, Robin could take it eventually. And it basically just limits your ability to do those, night ambush encounters, and that's the reason players want to take that, so they can prevent that. And then the bigger headache problem, which that one is okay. The bigger headache problem is now we can be in the middle of the dungeon and just get this long rest as long as we find, this spot off to the side and get it relative safety. Now, yes, the enemy can, prepare for that, but they could do that with any kind of long rest regardless. Just this case, they just can't attack you while the players are sleeping. So that one's a pain in the butt. I'm not going to ban it, but that would be on my watch list. That one, and now you've added counterspell on there for a good reason. And I've got Leomund's Tiny Hut, and then for me, just that stupid fucking fog cloud. I don't think I have any classes or subclasses. I will say that if I ever played in or DM'd a homebrew world, like you were saying, Stan, that specifically restricted those kind of classes. Like, for example, whenever I did a poll for what my next campaign would be back before we chose Rhyme, one of the options was converting the old Quest for Glory Sierra Adventure games into a D&D campaign, because I adore those games. And in those games, you played as generally heroic classes, although one was a thief. But I would probably ban, for example, the Warlock in that campaign, because it wouldn't really fit with what the players are doing and what they're all about if one of them was making a pact with a super powerful being. So there may be some firm bans if I were to do a campaign that was not, general Forgotten Realms, if it was specifically this homebrew world that had only certain, things in existence, then that would make sense to do those kind of bans.
Or if they ever bring Kryn back for Dragonlance, you're gonna have some extreme class restrictions.
I have a interesting relationship with Dragonlance. I didn't ever give a shit about the Forgotten Realms when I was growing up, but I loved Dragonlance. And I didn't even realize that was D&D until years later after the fact. I just thought it was a cool fantasy series. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say I was DMing those in junior high.
Nice. I was reading those books. I had no idea. It just felt like it was a cool adventuring thing, and it didn't occur to me oh yeah, of course it's a D&D party. Jesus. I've read dozens and dozens of those books. I love them. I finally stopped whatever one of the series, but anyway, yeah. So I have a interesting relationship with Dragonlance. I don't know if I'd actually want to play in that universe, because it feels older to me now. They would have to do something interesting to update it. I feel like, I don't know. Forgotten Realms. We're getting off topic. But Forgotten Realms has just become kind of the default that I'm used to right now. Although I would love to play an Eberron. Eberron excites the crap out of me. But Dragonlance would be interesting. All right. Final thoughts on DM bans. Farty, let's start with you.
I think for me, the last thing, because I have a very different situation than you. The people I play with, I don't know. I got them off looking for player groups.
Okay.
So the challenge is you don't know who you're playing, what kind of game they like to play. So there's a lot of, what I did was a really detailed write-up in my looking for player group, and laid out all the restrictions, what I was putting in place. So that way, those that really wanted to build something could just look at it and be like, yeah, you know what, I'm not even going to try.
That's a really good point. So sorry to interrupt you, but if you're specifically playing, yes, because I play with my best friends, and I don't have a lot of experience playing with new players, but obviously session 0 is important. But even before session 0, in your looking for group write-up, when you're creating the game, you can immediately put hard stops on, and obviously talk about what kind of game you're running, but include any kind of restrictions or limits or things from your point. So what were kind of the things you were having on there?
So I had things like, PHB only. I wanted to give them that restriction. point buy, standard array. I told
Okay.
it straight out, look, I'm not looking to play with people who want to min max or be OP.
Yeah.
Looking for more, 60% more role play, that kind of thing. So I laid out, and then I had like house rules. I had a fairly long document. I was actually worried about putting it up because I was like, nobody's gonna apply
I
for
mean
this.
that could it's gonna lower your applications, but it also means you don't have to sift through a bunch of players that aren't going to be compatible anyway.
Yeah, there was some great people that applied, and then I had interviews with them after to make sure. Okay, like, what are you looking to do? What kind of player you look? What kind of character you looking to play? And that helped me understand what's going on.
Nice, good for you. That sounds like a really good system. Stan, final thoughts on DM bans?
I really like what Freddie just said. If I'm going to do any bans, it's part of the homebrew I do up front. I haven't run into anything that I couldn't deal with once the game starts. But in game design, world design, session 0, you lay out these are the ground rules, and I run with that from there.
Yeah, that's really solid advice. Session 0 is critical and is the best place to talk about these things. But as we mentioned before, you don't have to even wait till session 0. You can do that during your recruitment. Mention the fact that, hey, I'm limiting this to the player's handbook, or hey, I've got this homebrew world and I'm allowing this, or I'm not allowing this, and this. In addition to the usual stuff, which is, what are you looking for? What kind of character you like, what kind of game do you like, all that stuff, which should be a part of it. But DM bans don't have to be, this horrible thing of like, oh, I've had this bad experience. It can just be, like Stan was saying with counterspells, like I don't want to, restrict my players or myself with these, magical no button. So I think they can be a useful way of rebalancing the game to make it a little more amenable to what we're trying to accomplish, as well as getting rid of some problematic elements or simplifying things, because at this point in 5th edition's life cycle, it's gotten pretty big. Like they've added a whole new class, they've got a whole ton of subclasses, all these new spells, all these new races, just a lot of stuff for players to handle. And the DM is already building the whole campaign, coming with all the monsters and the story and stuff. I'll be honest, not a lot of my brain matter is spent on thinking about what the players can do and what their, all their combinations and things are. So that's one reason why those restrictions can come in handy, is so we can just not have to worry about that stuff and instead focus on what we have to worry about. So yeah, DM bans, don't be afraid of them, but obviously use them sparingly. You need to. I think that will do it for the DM Roundtable for July 2021. Thank you so much to Farty and Stan for joining me, and thank you to all of the patrons. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Instant Lose, Roger, Stan, Nathan, and Alex. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Skelly, Nick, Farty McButterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, Baboon, Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. I'm Eric, and hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.